Admiral Gravik, you are hereby stripped of command authority. The individual before you is a government special operative under maximum security clearance. The announcement slammed through the mess hall, freezing the entire SEAL squad as the contract electrician finished her identity authentication. Just 4 minutes earlier, he jabbed a finger into her forehead and spat, "Your call sign is as cheap as your light bulb job." Now 3 men were being cuffed for military investigation. She stood tall, calm. "I'm not allowed to identify myself," she said, "but the law will answer for me." Kayla's first sweep wasn't with a flashlight, but with a neural net running on a microserver hidden in the battery compartment of her van. As she walked the perimeter before, clocking in the system, mapped the electromagnetic signatures of the base's security grid, logging every weak point, every outdated encryption cipher, and every physical choke point. The system didn't just register the buzzing street lamp. It identified the model number, the last maintenance date, and the suboptimal voltage regulator, allowing the unit to be trivially blinded or disabled. This wasn't an electrical job. It was an intelligence penetration test disguised as manual labor. She noted the poorly maintained chain link fence, the predictable patrol routes, and the SEAL's lack of perimeter awareness, signaled by the easy laughter drifting from the bar. Her mission wasn't to fix power. It was to find out who could break it. And the data coming back suggested the whole base was running on blind confidence and outdated protocols. She paused, pretending to adjust her boot, letting the passive scanners get a clearer read on the encrypted network traffic. Noting the alarming number of unsecured personal devices accessing the classified Wi-Fi, a direct breach of protocol that Admiral Gravik was clearly ignoring. Earlier that evening inside the command center, Admiral Gravik had summarily dismissed a lieutenant commander who dared suggest an audit of the maintenance spending, which had doubled inexplicably in the last quarter. "I run this base." Commander Gravik had snapped his voice, barely contained his shadow dominating the polished oak desk. "We don't waste money, we secure assets. If you can't see the difference between a receipt and a security guarantee, you're in the wrong office." The commander, a decorated logistics expert, had simply nodded shoulders, slumping as he retreated. Recognizing the futility of arguing against the Admiral's entrenched entitlement and the sheer force of his political protection. This incident, witnessed by the very junior officer now drinking with Halden, and Nash, cemented the culture of impunity. Gravik's word was law, and criticism, no matter how constructive or necessary, was met with professional annihilation. It was this atmosphere of unchallenged power where operational discipline was sacrificed for ego that Kayla had been sent to quietly dismantle. The SEAL's arrogance wasn't just personal, it was institutional, a direct reflection of the man at the top. As Kayla approached the security checkpoint booth near the perimeter road, she found the access panel for the temporary work permit scanner inexplicably plastered over, with a laminated image of a cartoon lightning bolt labeled Sparky's Spot. It wasn't an official act, but a petty low-stakes attempt at psychological intimidation designed to remind the civilian that she was an outsider, a tolerated pest. Kayla didn't flinch. She simply used the corner of her tool bag, the same bag Halden would soon grab, to scrape the sticky paper off the panel, leaving no mark on the booth, only a small wrinkled piece of paper, discarded meticulously into a nearby designated trash receptacle. The sentinel on duty, a young Marine who was clearly instructed to ignore the juvenile vandalism, watched the entire silent transaction, his face blank, but his eyes betraying a flicker of respect for the sheer lack of reaction. Kayla's calm, almost clinical removal of the insult was a statement in itself. She wasn't engaging in their games, and their attempts to define her were beneath her notice. She scanned her valid pass, heard the confirmation chime, and stepped through the turnstile, already 2 steps ahead of the men who thought they were making a point. "Okay, let's go back to the night it all started cracking open." Kayla Voss stepped out of the maintenance van around 11:30 boots, scuffing the gravel outside the gate. She had on a plain gray hoodie, sleeves pushed up grease streaks on the cuffs, and her tool bag hung heavy from one shoulder. The street lamp buzzed overhead, throwing a weak cone of light onto the cracked sidewalk. She rolled her neck, once slow feeling the day's knots loosen. Then the laughter rolled in from the bar across the street, loud, sloppy, the kind that carries when guys have had a few too many. Inside the bar, moments before Kayla arrived, Halden and Gravik were loudly debating the merits of field engineers versus desk specialists. a discussion that quickly devolved into a broad attack on any civilian presence near the base. They clutter the perimeter. Lieutenant Gravik had boomed, gesturing emphatically with a half-empty glass. They slow down operations. They lack the necessary fire to understand the stakes we play for. This base needs razor focus, not plumbers and electricians wandering around with their clipboards. Halden had agreed enthusiastically, offering his own misogynistic observation. And they look at us like we're the problem, Admiral, like they know better. That one the electrician she's got, that look the kind that thinks she can solve a 3-month operational snag with a better fuse. Nash, ever the opportunist, captured the exchange, labeling the clip Gravik's Law of Civi Inferiority. They were priming themselves for confrontation, their collective ego needing a soft target to assert their unchallenged dominance, mistaking Kayla's quiet professionalism for meekness and an invitation for abuse. They wanted a performance, a compliance born of fear, utterly unaware that their words were not only being recorded by Nash, but also being time-stamped and cataloged by Kayla's systems miles away. Lieutenant Reeve Halden led the Pack 32, built like a linebacker who never quite trusted the mirror. He spotted her first, elbowed the guy next to him. "Hey, electrician lady, you fixing the streetlights now, or just here to trip the breaker on our fun?" His buddies snorted. Sergeant Nash Ulrich, 29 phone, already up, red record light blinking. "Chat, give this girl a nickname. Something cute." Admiral Thorne Gravik ambled up, last 51, silver buzz cut. Catching the neon sign, shoulders squared, like he still expected salutes on a civilian sidewalk. He clapped Reeve on the back. Call sign Sparky Fitz. Civilians and live wires bad mix. He said it loud enough for the whole corner to hear. Kayla kept walking boots steady. She didn't slow, didn't speed up. Just let the bag swing once against her hip. Reeve reached out, snagged the strap of her tool bag. "Hold up, Sparky. Let's see what a pro carries." He yanked. The bag jerked open, a couple of inches, metal clinking. Something inside flashed a tiny white pulse, gone before anyone could focus. Nash zoomed in on his screen, frowned, replayed the clip in slow motion. The flash was there, then gone. He deleted the original file without saying why. Back at the bar, Nash didn't immediately join the renewed mockery. Instead, he obsessively scrubbed through the few frames of video he'd captured just as the bag strap was yanked. The quick white pulse he'd seen was too precise, too geometric to be a simple reflection. It looked fleetingly like a focused beam of light, perhaps a momentary flash from a high-tech sensor or a calibration check. He dismissed the thought, instantly rationalizing it away as lens flare or residual memory from the low-light sensor, but the doubt had already sunk its teeth in. He knew instinctively that if he showed the clip to Gravik, the Admiral would just scoff and call him paranoid. Yet the image, a split-second flash of military-grade precision in the hands of a Sparky, nagged at the edge of his professional subconscious. He poured another drink, the need to bury that inconvenient truth temporarily outweighing his desire for viral content. Kayla pulled the strap free with one smooth tug, zipped the bag, kept moving. After Kayla smoothly retrieved the strap, pulling the bag free with minimal resistance but maximum certainty, Halden was left holding a handful of air and a sudden confused silence. The abruptness of the movement was professional, devoid of emotion, yet it carried the weight of a physical block. He glanced down at his hand, then back at Kayla, expecting the standard civilian response, a panicked apology, a stuttered plea for him to leave her alone. Instead, he met a pair of eyes that were flat clear and focused entirely on the path ahead, as if he were a misplaced traffic cone rather than a ranking officer. The unsettling part wasn't the defiance. It was the total lack of engagement, the sheer fact that she didn't seem to acknowledge him as a relevant variable in her equation. Gravik, watching from the periphery, noticed the flicker of actual surprise in Holden's usually swaggering demeanor, a primal, subtle recognition of superior control. Kayla didn't break stride, allowing her silence to become a heavy leaden response, forcing the SEALs to fill the void with their own rapidly deflating confidence. It wasn't rudeness, it was the operational efficiency of someone who didn't waste energy on non-targets. Just before the sun cracked the horizon, Kayla was back in her utility van, not sleeping, but compiling. The data logged from her night shift sensors wasn't just electrical feedback, it was a full-spectrum vulnerability report on Base Security Zone Delta 4. She composed an encrypted zero-trace report detailing 4 major procedural violations, 6 operational weaknesses, and 3 distinct instances of officer harassment documented by audio and thermal imaging, complete with geotag timestamps. She classified the report under the highest operational risk category, labeling the command atmosphere under Gravik as failing systemic erosion of discipline due to unchecked seniority. This digital package, a file smaller than a thumbnail but holding the weight of a court-martial, was automatically forwarded to an anonymous offshore server known only as Custodian Alpha. She didn't write it out of revenge but out of duty. Her function wasn't to be respected by the SEALs. It was to document and neutralize institutional risks, and Admiral Gravik had just provided her with enough material to initiate a full-scale intervention. An act she performed with the same cold, quiet efficiency as splicing a cable. Gravik's secure phone rang at 0400, the ringtone a dull, urgent buzz. The voice on the other end was a low-ranking but highly connected aide from the Pentagon, cryptic and non-committal. Admiral, just flagging a very quiet inquiry from Joint Ops regarding a recent contractor access request. Unusual classification level. Don't worry about it, but ensure your perimeter is buttoned up and your staff is sharp. No noise. The aide hung up before Gravik could ask a follow-up question. The Admiral stared at the phone, a low growl forming in his chest. A quiet inquiry from J-Ops about an electrician preposterous. He immediately convinced himself that the contractor was perhaps an FBI plant looking into supply chain theft, a minor distraction he could easily crush with his rank and reputation. The thought that the inquiry might be about him or about the systemic rot Kayla was exposing never crossed his mind. Instead, the vague warning only served to stiffen his spine and harden his resolve to prove his dominance, particularly over the annoying Sparky, who was currently squatting in his utility tunnels. He rationalized, if the brass was watching, he needed to look strong, and crushing a civilian was the fastest way to demonstrate unchecked authority. Morning came gray and damp. Kayla knelt in the base's utility tunnel, replacing a frayed cable run. Fluorescent tubes hummed overhead, throwing hard shadows on concrete. Reeves showed up with 2 junior SEALs, boots echoing. Heard the night shift, got a show, he said. Let's see the pro at work. One of the juniors leaned over her shoulder, blocking the light. Mind if we watch? Make sure you don't cross the wrong circuits. Reeve Halden, fueled by the morning's petty resentment and the Admiral's unspoken approval, hadn't just come to watch Kayla work. He'd come to confuse the issue. Before Gravik arrived, Halden subtly swapped the schematic sheet taped to the tunnel wall with an older superseded version containing critical errors in the grounding loop layout. The change was almost imperceptible, a single line redrawn to reverse polarity on a phase connector, a mistake that would not only ruin Kayla's work, but could result in a dangerous feedback surge when the system went live. He did it with a practiced sleight of hand, laughing internally at the thought of the civilian having to explain why she botched a basic installation. The junior SEALs watched a nervous excitement radiating from them, realizing they were accessories to an act that, if discovered, would be serious, but which they knew Gravik would cover up as a training exercise. Halden leaned back against the wall, crossing his arms, waiting for Kayla to refer to the deliberately compromised diagram, and proceed with the flawed wiring, setting her up for a major career-ending failure that he could film and ridicule. Kayla fed the new cable through the conduit fingers, quick practiced. She didn't look up. Red to red, black to black, twist tape done. Her voice stayed low even. Kayla's eyes flickered once toward the compromised schematic, a movement so swift the men didn't register it as an official check. She didn't touch the paper. Instead, she produced a battered military-grade thermal tablet from a pouch, resting it against the concrete beside her knee. A 3-dimensional holographic overlay shimmered momentarily above the conduit, showing the live power flow and the correct current generation wiring diagram, a diagram that matched neither the fake document nor the outdated one she was replacing. Without slowing the pace of her work, she reached out and tapped a single line on the thermal display. The line glowed blue, indicating a critical safety path. She then proceeded to splice the wiring exactly as the holographic display dictated, completely ignoring the fraudulent sheet Halden had provided. The lieutenant, watching her hands work with baffling speed and accuracy, felt a sudden cold wave of confusion. She hadn't even looked at his schematic yet. She was working with a level of precision that surpassed anything he'd ever seen from base maintenance crews. Her silent, effortless dismissal of his attempt to trick her was a public humiliation more profound than any verbal exchange could have been. Gravik ducked into the tunnel entrance, filling it with his bulk. So, this is the hero from last night. Show us Sparky. Impress the Admiral. He folded his arms, waiting for her to flinch. She finished the splice, capped it, stood. Dust clung to her jeans. All set, she said, and stepped around him. When Gravik finally ducked into the tunnel, his impatience had boiled over into an operational demand that bordered on the absurd. Sparky, I've got a Priority 1 comms link due online in the South Wing by noon. I want this tunnel segment complete and certified by 10:30, or you're off the books immediately. The time frame was physically impossible for the remaining work, a calculated squeeze designed to force her to panic, cut corners, or simply argue, any of which would be grounds for dismissal. Kayla slowly finished the splice she was on, not accelerating her pace, but rather making every movement more deliberate and economical. She stood not in a rush, but with the quiet finality of a task completed. Instead of responding to his threat, she simply pointed a gloved finger at the multi-tool currently jammed into the conduit's inspection port. The tool's tiny integrated screen was displaying a live scrolling feed of compliance codes and technical requirements, all of which certified the current splice as complete and up to spec. She didn't meet his eye, didn't utter a word about his impossible deadline, but the action conveyed a clear message. Her work was compliant, regardless of his ego-driven schedule, and any attempt to rush her would be documented as a violation of safety protocol. She didn't wait for his reaction, simply stepping around his bulk and walking toward the next section, leaving him to argue with her silent professionalism. That afternoon, the cable snapped anyway. Old insulation hidden corrosion. A blue arc spat smoke curling fast. Reeve and a petty officer lunged for the panel, yanked the wrong breaker. Sparks showered. The petty officer's sleeve caught panic flashed across his face. Kayla moved before anyone registered it. She vaulted the safety rail, slid across the floor on one knee palm, slapping the emergency vent. A hiss, then cool air rushed in. She jammed a multi-tool into the jammed release, popped it, hauled the petty officer clear by his vest. Reeve stumbled out coughing behind him. Nash had his phone up again live. Chat, we got a real-life action sequence. Gravik watched Kayla check pulses wipe soot from the petty officer's cheek with her sleeve. Something shifted in the Admiral's eyes, a flicker he covered quick. Trained response, he muttered. Lucky guess. While Kyla was cleaning up her tools, Gravik was locked in a small, tense conference room, facing a screen showing a red-flagged report detailing the sudden, inexplicable failure of the base's primary weather radar feed, the direct result of the insulation failure Kayla had been fixing. The cable she had been replacing was part of the ancillary power unit for the radar array, and the subsequent fire had crippled the feed at the worst possible time, forcing the immediate diversion of 2 inbound fighter jets to a secondary airport 70 miles away. A frayed wire Admiral, the remote operations commander's voice was laced with disbelief. You mean to tell me a routine electrical failure compromised a high-altitude navigation mission? Gravik's face was stone, his denial practiced. It was negligence by the contractor commander. A civilian mistake. He omitted the part about the fire, the sparks, and Kayla's quick-thinking rescue. This operational lapse, directly caused by the shoddy maintenance he had ignored and compounded by the near miss with the petty officer, did not humble him. It terrified him. He felt the net tightening, and that fear immediately translated into a bitter, aggressive desire to publicly humiliate Kayla, the only person who knew the truth, before she could be used as evidence against him. Kayla stood, brushed her hands on her pants. Check the ground fault next time, she said. Then she walked back to her ladder. The young petty officer Kayla had hauled clear of the fire, was shivering, clutching a thermal blanket in the medic's temporary station, still slightly in shock. When he saw Kayla walk past, he started to push himself up his face, a mixture of gratitude and shame. Ma'am, thank you. You saved my skin back there. Before the words were fully out, Reeve Halden's hand clamped down hard on the petty officer's shoulder, forcing him back down onto the bench. Halden didn't raise his voice, which made the command chillingly effective. You owe her nothing, sailor. That was her job. She gets paid by the hour to do dangerous work. You don't thank the tools, you just use them. Now you keep that emotional nonsense to yourself. It was a lucky intervention, not heroism. The petty officer's eyes darted from Halden's granite face to Kayla's retreating back, his gratitude silenced by the force of command hierarchy and the toxic peer pressure. Kayla, already halfway down the corridor, didn't turn around, but the slight tightening of her jawline, a muscle clenching beneath the dust, was the only physical evidence that she had registered the deliberate cruelty of the interdiction. Another data point logged against Halden's file: suppression of operational gratitude. Evening in the chow hall smelled like overcooked meatloaf and industrial cleaner. Trays clattered. Nash had the rescue clip looping on the big screen, slowed down so everyone could see Kayla's hands blur. Our very own superhero Gravik announced, raising a coffee mug, to Sparky, savior of light bulbs and bad decisions. Laughter rippled. Reeves slid a plastic cup across the table to Kayla. Drink up, hero. Halden and Nash, needing to reclaim the narrative after the morning's failed sabotage and the afternoon's near disaster, conspired for a final public theatrical flourish. As Kayla sat down, Halden discreetly placed a small polished brass plaque, the kind used for memorializing military equipment, on her empty chair. Nash, filming from a subtle angle, zoomed in to show the engraved inscription, "Here sits Sparky, our designated hero, in memoriam of frayed wires and low voltage." It was a premeditated act of institutional gaslighting, intended to simultaneously mock her heroism, define her solely by her low-ranking job, and preemptively memorialize her fleeting moment of competence as a joke. The audience of SEALs and base personnel, already primed by the video loop, tittered, waiting for Kayla's reaction. They wanted her to see it, to feel the sting of the collective judgment, and for the entire mess hall to witness her forced submission. The setup was a perfect trap, leveraging the formality of a military plaque to deliver the cruelty of a schoolyard taunt, forcing her to confront their mockery the moment she decided to stand up or sit down. Kayla picked up her tray untouched food and carried it to the dish line. The transponder in her bag gave the softest click, like a seatbelt fastening. Nobody heard it over the noise. She dumped the tray stacked. It walked out. Kayla walked back from the dish line, navigating the clatter and the focused predatory silence of the mess hall. She approached her table, and without looking at the faces around her, her eyes found the plaque immediately. Instead of reacting, instead of freezing, arguing, or even showing a flicker of defeat, she did something utterly unexpected. She reached down not for the plaque itself, but for the tray of untouched food she had just picked up. She picked up a napkin, wrapped the little brass plate in it with surgical precision, and slid the whole package into a small, zippered pocket in her jacket, a pocket that was already labeled with a tiny, indelible "evidence" in military stencil. Her movement was fluid, entirely self-possessed, and completely nonverbal, transforming their prop of humiliation into a collected item for her dossier. The gesture was a vacuum sucking the air out of the room. The SEALs were left with no reaction to feed, on only the chilling realization that she didn't view the plaque as an insult, but as a tangible piece of data to be cataloged. Her silence wasn't fear, it was professional archiving. High above the base, a drone lifted off from a pad no one noticed. It climbed silent, released a coded pulse. Beacon 47. The challenge string rode the airwaves' spectral tier challenge, Dajerbay 24. Kayla felt the vibration against her hip, a pattern she knew by heart. She kept walking. Back in the mess, Reeve planted a cheap mic on the table in front of her empty chair. "Come on, Sparky, tell the people your origin story." Nash went live again. Gravik leaned in. "If you're some kind of machine, fix that attitude while you're at it." Phones tilted toward the scene. Kayla stood near the doors, hand on the push bar. The transponder answered the beacon, a silent handshake across encrypted channels. Gravik watched the plaque retrieval with a slow, contemptuous smile. His voice, when it cut through the lingering tension, was low, aiming for the perfect final humiliation before she left the room. "No, Sparky, you hold up. You've had your fun. Your badge says contractor, and you're here to serve. You don't get to decide what we call you or what you keep. Now, before you walk out that door, you turn around, you put that pathetic joke of a title back on the table, and you acknowledge your place. You're a disposable civilian, and right now, you're looking at an admiral who is willing to erase you for a small infraction. You're not a hero. You're a hired hand, and you will stay put until I dismiss you." He jabbed a finger not at her, but at the empty space above her head, where he imagined his rank hung like an executioner's axe. The The sheer audacity of the command, the complete disregard for her dignity, resonated across the entire hall. It was this specific final assertion of toxic rank and institutional abuse, this declaration that her humanity was subject to his dismissal, that triggered the final coded sequence in the transponder, initiating the emergency extraction and exposure protocol. Screens in the security office lit red. Asset verified, protect. Doors burst open. Black-clad Sentinel operators fanned in rifles low, but ready. One step between Kayla and the room. Asset Voss confirmed. Stand by. Nash's phone died midstream. Reeves' mouth opened closed. Gravik took one step forward, then stopped like he'd hit glass. The Sentinel commander faced the room. Admiral Gravik, you are hereby stripped of command authority. The words rolled out again colder in the fluorescent light. Kayla watched cuffs snap on Reeve Nash and a junior who'd laughed loudest. She adjusted the strap on her bag, calm as tightening a bootlace. I'm not allowed to identify myself, she repeated, but the law will answer for me. They moved her to a secure room, plain cinder block, one table, 2 chairs. A Sentinel officer slid paperwork across. We can reinstate you full active or you stay contractor. Your call? Kayla tapped the form once. Contractor, she said. She signed with a quick scrawl, gathered her tools. Word traveled fast inside the wire. Reeve lost his training billet, reassigned a supply count in the Arctic. Nash handed over every device, watched his follower, count flatline overnight. Gravik sat through a closed-hearing voice, flat repeating, I believe she was civilian, until the panel stopped asking. A week later, Kayla knelt under a panel in a warehouse on the edge of town, replacing a ballast. A young trainee walked past, slowed. Ma'am, sorry about the nickname. She tightened a screw, didn't look up. Earn a better one, she said. He nodded, kept walking. Gravik taught a new class on conduct, voice quieter than anyone remembered. He never said her name, didn't need to. Kayla finished the job, slung the bag, stepped into dusk. Streetlights flickered on one by one, steady, reliable. She disappeared around the corner, just another figure in a hoodie. You know that sting when someone sizes you up and finds you wanting? You've carried it. You've walked away without a word. You weren't wrong to keep your peace. You weren't alone in the hallway, the break room, the sidewalk. And healing starts the second you decide your worth isn't up for their vote. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.